continuing my trend of being just on the pulse of pop culture, we're going to talk about Joker. Also, I've got a new mic. Just testing this out for this video to see how it goes. I obviously want to talk about the movie itself, but really I want to focus on the audience response to it. Broadly speaking, my opinion of this film is positive. I think Joaquin Phoenix is incredible in it, obviously. I mean, is it worth saying that? I think everybody agrees. Even the people that don't like Joker go, yeah, Joaquin's great in it. I think the whole film rests on his shoulders, and without him in the main role, it would have been a very different movie. I think it's quite widely known now that a lot of the scenes in the film were very different to the ones in the script. Most famously is the bathroom dance, which originally was much more typical. It takes place after Arthur has killed those guys on the subway. I think he was going to come in, throw up, hide the gun, and wash the makeup off his face. Just very typical, very generic. It doesn't really tell you anything about who he is. And I think that is the most important change that they made in the whole film. I know they added a bunch of scenes where Arthur's playing with the gun and dancing and going like, hey, you come here often? And I think it was Joaquin Phoenix driving this change. They played around on the day and found this dance scene, which is very eerie and unsettling, but I think tells you everything about the character. You can see he feels euphoric. He feels like himself. And why wouldn't he want to seek that feeling out again? And that's why it's my favourite scene in the whole film, and it came from the actor, not the writer or the director. I will give Todd Phillips props, because he was open to the idea of collaboration and working together to strengthen the story rather than sticking to what his vision was. I think it's beautifully shot. I think that Hilda Gudnadottir's score is tremendous. I remember the moment I heard it, I was like, oh yeah, this feels like the Joker. But I found it a very frustrating film because it was part comic book movie and part serious character study. And for a long time, it felt like those two things were fighting with each other. I watched the film again last night and enjoyed it a lot more than I had the previous two times I'd seen it, because I watched it as a comic book movie instead of the serious film that I think it was pretending to be. And that is not meant to be an insult. I love comic book movies. I'm a big fan of Marvel. The Dark Knight is one of my favourite films of all time. I love that stuff. I just think that this movie was superficially trying to seem like it was a Scorsese film from the 80s. Casting Joaquin Phoenix feels like we're taking this seriously. He is a proper, serious, dramatic character actor. The director Todd Phillips had famously, or infamously, had said, we're going to try and sneak a real film through the Hollywood system. Then we hear stories about an 8-minute standing ovation at the Venice Film Festival, which is where the film premiered. It then went on to win the top prize at the Venice Film Festival, called the Golden Lion. That's an award that previously went to Roma and The Shape of Water, big award winners. And of course, Joker became one of those. Joaquin Phoenix, JP, he won every acting award going. All of this adds to the narrative that what you're about to see is important. But it's a big, silly Batman film. Yes, it explores serious themes and the tone is dark and melancholic. But it's also a story about how Batman and the Joker might be half-brothers and there's a big imaginary girlfriend twist in it. It also revels in connecting everything to famous iconography. The punchline of the whole film is that Thomas and Martha Wayne get shot in that alley, that very famous scene that we've all seen a million times, but showing it in a new way, taking a new stance on it. It was getting excited to show, it teases it out, like the imagery sort of builds up. It's like, oh, there's Zorro, oh, there's the shooter, building up all that imagery in anticipation. It's like it's excited to tell you what it's about to do. Oh, we're gonna do the scene in the alley, Batman's parents are gonna die. And this sort of enjoyment of connecting things to the comic book world is all over the film. The scene where Arthur meets little Bruce Wayne for the first time, we're bringing all the history, all the different iterations and interpretations, these two icons meeting each other, and the dramatic irony being that they don't know how important they are to each other yet. The response to this film I find very interesting. It became a meme very quickly. In the climax of the film, Joker yells about society and then people are making jokes about how cringeworthy that is, like the film doesn't know that what the character is saying is cringeworthy. I can't believe he's really saying like we live in a society. Of course he is. That's the sort of character he is. He really believes that. You're not supposed to agree with him. And it doesn't mean that the filmmakers agree with him. That's the distinction that I think a lot of people failed to make with this movie. Just because a character says or does or believes something, it doesn't mean that that's the thesis of the movie. It's the same people who get annoyed about Kylo Ren saying, let the past die. And they forget that he's a Star Wars villain who killed his own father. He killed Han Solo. Why was that going to be... Yeah, that must be the main point of the movie. That should be the takeaway. The protagonist of this story is one of the most famous villains of all time. He's a bad guy. It's not supposed... You're not supposed to be like, yeah, good point. There are serious things to discuss in the film, like the rich versus the poor, the treatment of mental health, which, incidentally, I don't have a problem with. I think a lot of people feel like it could be adding to a stigma or even dangerously suggesting that the actions in the film could be the result of untreated mental illness. I didn't feel this way personally. In fact, the strongest message that I came away with on that subject is the very blunt point that it makes about mental health services being underfunded and underappreciated in general. But overall, I find some of the more political and social themes to be very muddled and undercooked. I think that's mostly because Joker himself, he's not bothered. He doesn't care about it. He doesn't believe in it. So why should I? In the context of this film, he's my protagonist. He's the person that I'm following, and he's not bothered. This is the stuff that's happening in the periphery. Even the killing of Bruce Wayne's parents is a misinterpreted political message. They take the Joker's words, you get what you deserve, and repurpose them to fit their own narrative. And I find that interesting too. That happens quite a lot in the film. The Joker does stuff and then the world responds, and he had no intention of the cause and effect. And that's kind of like what happened with the film. I think the first time I watched Joker, I felt very overwhelmed by it. I went in with all that expectation, winning accolades and standing ovations and Joaquin Phoenix being great. And I pulled lots of ideas out of it. I even have a theory that I talked about on my podcast with Mark Kermode called Kermode on Film, where we talked about Joker. I had a theory about Joker potentially being a paedophile. There's a lot of imagery in there that you can interpret and tell that story. The second time I saw it, I found it a very sad watch, because this time I knew what his trauma was, and so every time he was laughing, I just found that more tragic than the first time. Third time, after a bit of breathing space and after all the memes, I was able to watch it almost fresh and enjoy it for what it was. Yes, I think it is important to discuss the ideas that go on in it if you want to, but for my own personal enjoyment, I get way more out of it just viewing it for what I think it is. A big, silly Batman villain movie.